Hey guys, I'm back here with JJ from ASUS, and we are taking a look at the new UEFI setup on ASUS's new Haswell line of motherboards. So JJ, thank you for joining us again. We are looking at, what are we looking at? This is one of your mainstream boards, right?
Yeah, the actual UEFI that we're specifically looking at is for the Deluxe series, but this video will actually apply to all of our motherboards, so TUF, WS, and even ROG.
Okay, and we'll start with this, but then we'll go ahead and set up another system to look at ROG, because there are some ROG specific features as well.
That's correct. So there will be certain functions within the UEFI that are only available on ROG motherboards, as opposed to these primary features that are going to be throughout all the board segmentations.
Okay, so this is on the mainstream board. This is a deluxe board, but everything you see here, if someone gets a Pro or Plus, they should kind of all be there.
That's correct. They'll have these same features.
Okay, so the start screen, this looks very familiar to me. What's different here?
The main thing that we actually have gone about doing here is improving some of the functionality. So the previous generation easy mode, I would say, was more passive. Overall, it did have some interactive aspects, but it was predominantly focused at allowing you to have immediate kind of information specific to your system, whether it was maybe some temperature information, or confirmation on the CPU that was installed, things along those lines. So for this generation, we went ahead and added some additional functions to be able to make it a little bit more usable for not only the enthusiasts, but for the novice users. So if we take a look here in the primary section of the UEFI, the first one you're going to see is this DRAM information. So one of the most commonly used aspects that we see amongst users when they first set up a system is their attempt to go ahead and set up XMP. Now there are a lot of users that don't necessarily understand that you have to go in and you have to define the XMP value for it to be applied. So by default, they're generally running in some form of the SPD baseline values for the memory.
Now for people who don't know, SPD, there's just that serial presence detect. It's a little bit of memory or programmable memory that's on your DRAM stick that has all of its timing information built in.
Correct.
And then XMP was kind of like it's an overclocking profile on top of that.
Correct, yes. And the majority of kits that are purchased for the enthusiast oriented platform, even actually for moderate or standard builds, actually tend to be XMP enabled memory. So we want to find a way that how could you make this easier for the user to just be able to pop in here and be able to enable it without necessarily knowing that you had to maybe go into advanced, the overclock section, go into the manual parameters, and actually select XMP. So we now have a one-click option. So the user can go ahead and just go to the DRAM, they can select the profile, choose to apply it, it goes ahead and makes that modification, and then from there it's automatically enabled it for you. So it's a much simpler process for users in terms of just being able to quickly enable the XMP profile.
So in the past, you'd have to go into advanced mode and then go into the overclocking section and then actually enable XMP.
Yeah, it was probably, I'd say, close to maybe 4 to 5 steps to actually have to go in there to be able to enable something as basic as this. And what we find is that there are a number of enthusiasts that they might choose to run their system entirely from a stock perspective, and even though, quote unquote, they're running an overclocked DRAM profile, they're not necessarily interested in having to be aware of all those other aspects or even knowledgeable to all those other aspects of the UEFI. So this just makes it easier for them.
Gotcha. Now under CPU information here, I see voltage. What voltage is that referring to? That's what the fiber is outputting to the CPU cores?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
So that would be, technically what you would be referring as the CPU voltage that you would be running at.
Okay,
yeah.
Got it.
So the next option that we have here is our fan control section. Now we offered this in the previous generation, but same thing in the vein of wanting to make things easier, more functional. In the fan section, we've now integrated quick fan time options for your fan headers. So if we go ahead and click the expansion option, we can see right here it lists to us every single one of the fan headers, and we can also go ahead and select profiles for them. So this is a quick and easy way, once again, so that the user doesn't have to be knowledgeable at having to go all the way into maybe, let's say, the advanced section, under hardware monitor, under fan controls, then breaks down to manual, and then have those options. Now, of course, they could go into AI Suite 3 and do this all entirely from the OS with even more granularity and more flexibility. But for users that want to do this on a hardware level, it's a much more simplified mechanism to have to go into the advanced section.
Very cool. Now, what's the difference between standard and normal?
You're going to just essentially have different ASUS presets where we've gone ahead and modified the fan curve so that you have better acoustics. So under the standard preset, it's going to be a slightly more, I'd say, aggressive policy as opposed to the silent, where we're really trying to maintain the lowest acoustic pattern that we can. And then from there, turbo is a little bit more of an aggressive ramp, but still it's quieter. Manual will link in a predefined input table that we have for minimum and maximum RPMs, as well as the corresponding temperatures associated to them. But if you select it, it'll actually let you know, because there's some more complex aspects to it, you are going to need to go into the advanced section so you can modify all of
Gotcha.
this. But we feel that's another element that goes ahead and just adds a little bit more granularity, a little bit more control, but makes it so much easier in terms of having to jump all the way out. Now, if we move down here to the bottom section, of course, we still continue to have the same great options to be able to drag and drop different drives for boot priority optimization. But one of the things we get a lot of people that they wonder about is a quick and easy way to confirm what they have installed in their system. So we now have a real-time SATA information recognition option. So you can go ahead and just click on that, and that'll let you immediately know all the drives that you have connected at one time.
That's super useful, because for me, it's one of those deals where I'm usually playing with like an SSD that hasn't been released, it doesn't have final firmware, and half the time these things die, and I don't know if it's just not coming up because it's not in the OS, or this is supremely useful.
So that kind of continues the vein of what we've tried to do with Easy Mode, is make this hopefully useful to an even enthusiast, but also definitely try to be able to add value to the normal user in terms of being able to give them quick functions that they want to have functionality for, but don't necessarily override into that area where you're going to need to go into the advanced section.
Yeah.
So from then there, the rest of the options we see are pretty straightforward. We're going to have this one shortcut option, but we're going to highlight this more once we actually get into the advanced section. So from here, we are going to go ahead and jump into the advanced section and show some of the options that we have there. So once we go ahead and jump into here, the first tab is going to look pretty familiar to anybody that's already seen ASUS UEFI, but there have been some pretty big changes underneath in terms of the coding that we've done on the back end. So one of the first ones we have right here is a quick note function. So for a lot of you guys that do tweaking and tuning on your system, I know for me, I usually have like a piece of pen and paper pad, or maybe a tablet, and I'm writing all the settings that I might be tweaking or tuning or adjusting, but you don't have to do that anymore. You can now actually have embedded quick note functionality inside there. So I can go ahead. So we can see here, if I can spell right, if I can, there we go. Oh, all right. All right, we're getting it here. If I can capitalize. All right, close enough. And we can actually go ahead and then save this, and it would be persistently stored inside there. So you can imagine that, if maybe you're making some overclocking adjustments, maybe you're making some modifications to the UEFI, even for people that are rolling out the system and they want users to maybe be conscientious of information that's specific to their platform and how it's been configured, that can all be stored inside there, and it can be brought up when you need that information, as opposed to having to worry about, hey, where's that piece of paper that is attached to it, or here's a README file, things along those lines.
So quick note, does that... is that only for this home screen, or can you make notes per individual page? Like how is this treated? Is this treated as
the quick note function is literally, it's almost like a mini word processor inside of the UEFI environment. So it's not specific to one page.
Gotcha.
It'll be specifically stored to whatever degree of information you want to go ahead and have contained within there. So if you ever want to just keep adding more, you would just go ahead and note that. So it's not specific to the one primary page that we're on.
Gotcha.
It's more so that we just have integrated that functionality, and you can define whatever you'd like within it.
And I'm assuming this gets written to your firmware.
Correct.
And I'm assuming it persists if I upgrade my UEFI?
There is the possibility that we would be able to do that, but it is a bit more complicated. As of right now, it will actually be dumped out and replaced with a clean slate if you were to go ahead and update the UEFI. But of course, the reality of the expectation is that most users after a period of time aren't consistently updating their UEFI. Generally, only maybe within the first 1 to 3 months do you have maybe more persistent updating that user executes upon. Some users don't even go about the point of even updating it altogether.
And if you do a clear CMOS, does that file go away as well?
Yes, if you were to clear the CMOS, it would go ahead and remove that as well.
And is there any present support for exporting that data?
There is actually some planned functionality for that, but it won't be in the current initial release, but we hope to have that within probably about a month after the release.
Okay. And then what's the button next to it do?
The last button, last modified button, is pretty cool. We'll touch on it a little bit more once we've gone through some more of the functions. But essentially what it allows us to do is, I made some previous adjustments in terms of the fan control because I have a integrated water cooling solution on here, and so we would generally want to go ahead and disable one of the headers for the pump. But what it actually allows you to see is a real-time table of the actions that you've committed inside the UEFI. So if you go about, let's say, making multiple changes to your voltages, your multipliers, to your SATA operation, maybe at the end of all of this you kind of want to have a visual affirmation to know what you've executed and completed. You can now see that within the last modified log file. And if you need to, for whatever purposes, maybe share it amongst friends or people that might be assisting you in setting up your system, you can export this, save it to USB, and then from there dump it out and put it out to a community in a forum post or send it to somebody in email.
So this will literally store every single change I do?
Yeah.
That's awesome. And there's no limit to the length of this? Like if If I change every single option in there, it'll take them all into account?
That's a great question. We'll have to verify and see if actually to what extent.
Okay.
But I think I've tracked close to 30 items, and I don't think too many people are going to change that many items. So it does
In a single sitting?
In a single sitting, yes.
Okay, cool.
So we think that's another great addition that we've gone ahead and incorporated in there. Now another one that we've had in previous generations was our what's called F3, our table of contents kind of shortcut option. And this was our way of trying to make the UEFI easier to work with, because the reality is that you don't go use every single part of the UEFI. Mm-hmm. Many users find consistent portions that they use consistently, and what we wanted to do was allow for granularity at how you could go ahead and define the places that you navigate to most frequently. So we have two options. One is this new tab that's called My Favorites, and you can see if I jump over to it, it's pretty much going to let you know, hey, if you want to add something to this, just go ahead and go to that section and go ahead and touch on F4. So if I can go ahead and, let's say, go to my SATA configuration, maybe that's a key item that I'm going to go ahead and need access to, I can go ahead and add it to my favorite page, as well as I could add it to my shortcut page. So now if I go ahead and go to F3, you're going to see that I now have SATA mode selection. So if I was to jump to, let's say, my monitor section, which is a frequently queried part of the UEFI, it jumps in there, and if I now want to go ahead and back to my SATA mode, it'll jump me directly to that.
Okay.
And from there, same thing. If I want to go over to my favorites, you can now see that I have that UEFI option directly there, and it's even adjustable from that portion of the UEFI.
Oh, interesting.
So we've linked essentially just those specific actionable items from the UEFI in one place for you. So if you need consistent access to just certain areas or even certain functions, you don't have to worry about always now going and diving into the tree of the UEFI. You can pretty much just map it to a point, either under the F3 option, or you can go ahead and head over to the My Favorite section.
Yeah, no, so I can see this being really useful, again, in what I do, because once I have my system set up, there are only a couple of things that I'm adjusting frequently.
Correct.
Whether it's the configuration mode for the SATA controller, or maybe all I'm playing with is multipliers or
Correct.
something like that. So I can see this being supremely useful.
So we think this is just another layer of really where we try to focus in the UEFI. First and foremost, it's about fluidity, it's about responsiveness, and then having something that's well laid out. But our first goal when we introduce any usable features or functions is to try to make sure that that is really cultivated towards a sense that you're going to want to use this functionality, as opposed to just being something that we throw in there from a gimmick perspective. So moving past that, we can go ahead and head over into the SATA configuration mode. And when we go there, you're going to, of course, see a real-time listing of all the drives, and that's not necessarily anything new. Of course, we've had this for a while. But what we now have the ability to do is I can go ahead and select this, and I can actually delete this field. And here I actually have two Corsair Force GTs set up in a RAID 0. Now, if you're like me, sometimes you go about, maybe you're doing different things in the non-windowed environment, and you want to know which drives you have connected to which ports and what they might be. Now you can go ahead and name them. So I can go ahead and name this Windows 8 RAID 1, and that would let me know that that's actually my primary drive.
Okay.
And so you can now uniquely label every single one of your headers so that you know. And this is going to be great for especially people that have complex storage configurations like me. One of my home systems, I have 4 2-terabyte drives, and they're all from the same vendor.
Yep.
And so maybe I want to have one be my Steam backup, one's personal photos. That way, anytime I'm within the UEFI, if I'm making anything where I might be a little bit scared about the change I'm making, I don't have to worry about disconnecting the drive. I know exactly what's on what because I've labeled it accordingly.
Yeah, no, dude, I could have used that feature like 10 years ago.
So we think that's another great function that we've gone ahead and added within our UEFI environment.
That's actually what's most interesting to me about all of these things, not only just physically on the board, but also in the UEFI setup. These are all things that I wish I had so very long ago.
Yeah.
Right? Because back then, the complexity of dealing with any of this was just so much higher. It's nice to see that you guys are still pushing it and that we're still getting these things, even at the point where people are like, oh, there's not much room for additional work here on the desktop. But it's nice to continue to have that additional level of polish each time.
Agreed, and I think for us that's really where one of our key points of value is, that when you're buying an ASUS product, that's one of the things that we still continue to try to excel upon, right, is taking the feedback from the community at what we can refine and what we can make better. So rounding that out, for this generation, of course, we've continued to incorporate all the advanced fan control functionality that you would expect. So you can go per every single one of the headers in there and go ahead and fully manually define, full parameters available for each one of those headers. And that's an important important point because it's not only a hardware combination, but it is a UEFI combination to be able to support this level of granularity inside the UEFI environment. Now, we of course give you even more advanced control functionality within AI Suite 3 and our Fan Expert 2 package, but for users that want to be able to just have that hardware granularity control and applicable to each one of the headers, it still maintains its option inside the UEFI and consistent for all the boards you're looking at. So rounding that out, that pretty much takes us to to the next section, which is we're going to go ahead and touch on some unique options that we've implemented exclusively for ROG series UEFI.
Okay, now we've switched boards here. What board are we looking at?
This is going to be the Maximus 6 Extreme, but all the options that we're going to be focusing on will be fully functional on the Extreme, the Hero, the Gene, even on the upcoming Formula. They'll all apply to any of the ROG series boards.
Okay. So what's different here? Show me what we get here that we don't get.
So a couple of different items here. So first off is you can see in the top left-hand corner, we actually have a little kind of like blinking eye. It's the ROG Pulse. For the performance kind of tweakers that are out there, they sometimes are overclocking the systems, and the system, even within the post environment or sometimes within the UEFI environment, can lock up or freeze. So this is kind of an immediate way that they'll always be knowing that the system is actually still working.
Okay. It's
essentially just always still executing something that's working there in the background. So
yeah, because I've had crashes in the UEFI or BIOS setups, and it's not until I actually hit the keyboard that I realize that the system's locked.
Correct. And so this is just an immediate way for you to be able to reference whether or not the system's still working or not.
Has anyone given you feedback that they want that pulse more frequent? Right? Because I feel like I have to wait that extra half a second to know whether or not the system's hung.
Yeah, I suppose that'll be an interesting point of feedback that we'll get from users on whether or not they want to be able to tweak it. For the guys that are interested, you can go ahead and disable this if you don't want to have it turned on. So next layer, of course, with this being ROG, where we do have a focus on performance and for overclockability, we go ahead and do have some additional options that are specifically catered towards the new BCLK functions that we have on this chipset and CPU. So if we go in, we're going to see that we have some specialized values that we've gone ahead and optimized for, so that if users want to be able to go ahead and take advantage of more specific overclocking profiles for BCLK, they can go ahead and easily go ahead and just load up one of these profiles and then dynamically tune up from there. We've even incorporated a special 200 option, which if you go by the technical implementation on how we're achieving, it's actually supposed to not be possible, but we've done some really interesting things on the hardware side of the board for this, and actually our deluxe series board that allow you to achieve this result. So
I don't suppose you'll tell me what it is that you guys have done.
It's secret sauce for a reason.
Okay. But normally, so if I'm not on one of these and if I'm not on the deluxe board, I don't get the 200 option period.
That's correct, yeah. I mean, you could go ahead and attempt it, but it wouldn't be possible in terms of being able to be reached.
Interesting. So you would top out at 166 plus the
correct. Yeah.
Plus or minus 5 to 7%.
Yeah, well, and you could even scale up to a higher degree, but you would be a couple of BCLK steps short of that 200 option.
Got it.
So just a little bit extra special sauce that we put in the hardware design on the board. So from there, we're going to go ahead and continue forward. And if we take a look at the next step, one of the big things that we do a lot in ROG and ASUS as a whole is do optimization for our boards for different memory modules that are on the market, just for improved compatibility and performance tuning. For ROG, we kind of take it to another layer. So we've gone through and created custom profiles for a huge amount of the DRAM ICs that are on the market.
That's really cool.
So users can go in here, and these are all specific to different popular ICs that are made from different companies. We have it profiled down to the MRC level, tying into every single aspect, so that if users know which memory kits that they're using, they can go ahead and just load up one of these profiles, and it'll automate the overclocking process for them significantly, because of course some modules like some settings and other ones don't like certain settings. So this is kind of that extra layer to show that it's not just on the hardware that we're improving it, but even within the UEFI, which complements your hardware, you can go ahead and get a better class of experience.
So this is, obviously the end user has to know exactly who's supplying the DRAM on their devices.
Correct.
But some of these, what's the difference between Hynix and new Hynix?
It gets a little bit tricky, and we're actually, a lot of users can get more information on this is within our ROG forums, where we'll stipulate a lot more information specific to the way that the modules work, the frequencies that they'll work at, and the subtiming information. But that's pretty much what we're just distilling it down to, is to be able to go ahead and reference, one class of IC at one generation versus a newer class of IC at another time.
Got it. That's really cool.
So moving past that, another one that we have that's unique is going to be the GPU DIMM post. ROG boards tend to have users that adopt multi-GPU configurations more consistently. So here they're actually going to have a visual way to see how the PCIe lanes are being mapped and whether or not they're through the CPU, or if it's on a board like the Maximus 6 Extreme is where it might even be run through in terms of the PLX. So this is just a nice way allowing you to ensure that you're getting the best performance. Take for instance in our board, if you always run on the primary top slot on the PCIe, you're always going to be running native directly through the CPU, but through other lanes you might end up going through the PLX. So depending on how you map it out, you might not be able to taking optimum advantage of the way that we've laid out the board. Our board even allows for in two-way configurations, we're still mapping only through the CPU as opposed to the PLX. So this just way, if you go ahead and are populating different things, you can go ahead and make sure that it's set up in the way that you would like it to be set up in.
Got it.
In addition to that, of course, you have a visual affirmation to make sure that all the channels are correctly detected, as well as seeing what frequency that they're running at. So here we actually have 2800 DIMMs that are installed, but you can see it's only detected them at the SPD value, the JEDEC 1333, and they're running at 1333. So then that way also, once again, you know, hey, I need to go ahead and enable the XMP profile so that I can get the maximum memory speed that they're rated for. So moving from there, we have, of course, a very special set of options, which once again are going to be very esoteric to a degree, but we feel add a whole nother layer for the users that really want that much extensive control over their platform. And they're under these kind of special tweakers paradise range of settings. So a lot of these are just extra layers of granularity and control that we have over the system, and that we go ahead and define, you know, where you can take advantage of them when you're tweaking or tuning your system, whether it's for efficiency or whether it's for peak performance, because not necessarily efficiency always ties into peak performance, depending on how you're scaling the platform. So this is just kind of another element of functionality we have tied into the ROG UEFI.
Now, so I saw a Gen 3 toggle in there. Does that what does that do? Let you toggle between PCIe operating modes or frequencies?
That's correct. Yeah, so we can just go ahead and toggle back and forth. So outside of that, if we go ahead and jump over into the tool section, right here, you're going to see that we have another option, which is called ROG SSD Secure Erase. So this is just really straightforward. The user can go ahead and enter into this environment. You can see right there, pretty much would show you your SSDs. You could go ahead and click Erase, and you'd be able to good to go. So it's a really advanced actually option that took us quite some time in terms of being able to incorporate the functionality for it. But we feel that for users that are looking to maintain the best performance of their system, they don't have to worry about third-party applications booting up into a Linux environment or anything along those lines. Of course, if you happen to be buying from a vendor that has a great utility toolbox, then you can go through that route. But ultimately, we feel it's a great option to have to simplify the process.
No, because a lot of if you're buying from the big guys, you know, Intel, Samsung, all these folks, they have secure erase utilities within Windows. But for a lot of these folks, you know, you're buying an SSD from a smaller vendor. They don't have a Windows-based toolbox. Correct. Right? And you know, you still want to secure erase them. Or for me, honestly, a lot of times I'm testing a drive that's not even out yet, and there's no secure erase toolbox, so I have to.
It doesn't exist yet.
Yeah, it doesn't exist. So this is really useful. You may not know the answer to this, but I'm sure you have it documented somewhere. I feel like I should ask it regardless. Do you know what password it sets before it does the secure erase?
Actually, that's one of the most complex things. We actually detect that based on the controller that's being initialized. So there actually are different strings in place for different drives.
Oh, interesting. And all of that's documented somewhere.
Yeah. As far as whether or not we'll fully disclose all that information out there, you know, I guess that'll be based on the feedback that we get from the community. But we definitely try to be as transparent as possible.
Yeah, because you definitely want to, right? The danger there is if someone... if their power is interrupted or something during a secure erase, the secure erase procedure is you set a password, do the secure erase, then you remove the password.
Correct.
If you reboot during that process before it's complete, now
you could compromise. Yeah, you could compromise the drive and
you have a drive that's now locked, right?
Yeah.
Cool.
So the next option is actually unique to the OC panel. So the OC panel is that little piece of hardware that we showed in our initial preview of the overview on the motherboards. But this is an area of the board where you can go ahead and define your own unique, essentially like overclocked profile to be able to create a one-button overclock function on the OC panel itself. So this, of course, is going to be exclusive to ROG boards because the OC panel is exclusive to ROG boards. So outside of that, that pretty much wraps up some of the key features that are exclusive to the ROG series, as all the other features that we already shown are already also present here.
Gotcha. So this is I don't know, I feel like this is a good evolution over where you were last year. I feel like there's nothing else you could possibly do. Like this is, what could you do for, you know, next round, right? Like it's...
Actually, I feel.
Or do you guys feel like there's still tons of runway?
I feel actually we have a huge amount more that we want to incorporate. There's actually left on the table almost 20 items along with some ID-based parameters that we haven't phased in yet just because of the sheer bandwidth requirement. A lot of people don't understand that when configuring the UEFI, there's an extensive number of options that every time you touch one of these things, you're touching other functions that tie into other parts of the UEFI. And when we make a change, it could be affecting compatibility, MSR tables on how different things respond. There's all kinds of like little things. So it's a very difficult process to manage improving while not breaking anything at the same time. But we still feel we have a lot more to bring to the table in terms of UEFI enhancements for hopefully the next generation. Who knows, maybe even before that.
So you guys with Haswell, Intel's very big on saying that, hey, look, the desktop's not dead. We're still committed to it. But you guys, like, you're living and breathing that. Like, you still 100%. Feel like there's too much, there's just a ton of room left here.
We feel that 100% there's a ton of room, and we see that commitment from our users first and foremost, and we're confident that we can keep coming up to the bat to give them more.
That's awesome. Cool. Well, that wraps up the UEFI setup. Next video, you are going to sit down with me, and you're going to take me through not only what you guys are doing on the Windows side, but also you're going to give some pointers on how to overclock Haswell.
Correct.
Awesome. And we'll see you again soon.